This is Chris for JamPlay.com, and I'm here with a quick lesson on palm muting. Palm muting is one of those things that is pretty simple and nearly everybody uses, but sometimes getting the technique to sound exactly like you want it to can be a bit tricky. So the first thing to consider with palm muting is get to know your bridge. If it's a floating bridge like this one, meaning I can go up or down, a tendency for a lot of people when they're palm muting is to be too far back and draw their guitar sharp just a little bit. You know, it might sound like this. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you've probably experienced that if you're on a floating bridge. The other thing that can happen is that people will palm mute too far up this way, and interestingly enough, it draws it sharp as well. It can draw it as much as a half step sharp. Listen as I palm mute this A chord. It actually sounds like I'm doing this. Just sort of. That can be a great technique. You know, some metal rhythm players, Metallica actually uses that every once in a while to palm mute up the neck or up the string a little bit to get that sort of half step sound. But if you don't mean to do that, sometimes you can be sort of drawing your guitar out of tune without really even thinking about it. So let's look at hand position here real quick. In general, you want to stay on the rigid part of the bridge, unless you're going for some effect, and you're going to be using this portion of your hand. So the same portion of your hand that you use for legato muting, like we talked about in the last lesson, but you're going to be right on the bridge. Okay, so that it's you're basically deadening the transition between the string and the saddle. And if you experiment with just one, doing downstrokes, and move your hand around to find that sweet spot, that'll help you get to know your bridge a little bit. And then the next easiest thing, obviously, is to start with power chords or 3-note chords on your lower strings for the most part. Okay. The other thing that you want to make sure you're doing when you're palm muting is, we talked about this with alternate picking, but you want to make sure that most of your energy, in fact, all of your energy, is coming from your wrist and your fingers. You don't want to get into the habit of really reefing on it and involving your shoulder too much, because that's going to compromise the accuracy of your palm muting position. Okay? And then the other thing to think about, and this is where our exercises are really going to focus, are make sure that when you're doing this, that you're able to transition between palm muting and open playing pretty easily. You know, doing downstrokes is no big deal, you know, but really using the open strings in these types of lines as an accent, as you saw me doing it in the opening and then also there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out a couple different exercises for you, a couple different suggestions. I would recommend practicing these to a click track eventually after you've learned them. We're going to be just on the A chord. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to practice an 8th note pattern, all downstrokes, but we're going to accent on the snare beats, which are beats 2 and 4. Okay, so that's going to sound like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So we're doing 8th notes, and we're playing palm muted on everything except for hole 2 and hole 4. Okay, get used to doing that over a variety of chords. Okay, the second pattern we're going to be working on is the same thing. We're emphasizing the snare beats, but we are going to be doing 16th notes and emphasize all downstrokes. Okay, so that's going to sound like this. You're going to count 16th notes, 1 E and a. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. using the strumming and rhythm patterns lesson that was recorded previously in this series, I would suggest writing out some of your own rhythms and deciding where you want to accent things and then practicing those. If you look in the list of supplemental content, there are a number of different patterns, like I've mentioned, where you're doing one accent on one and the other accent on the end of three or whatever. Both 16th note and 8th note patterns in 4/4. So look over that list in the supplemental content and try to get a feel for reading the rhythm. Try writing some of your own rhythms out and just be really conscious as to where you're accenting using palm muting. And this should go a long way to spicing up your basic rhythm playing.